What is going on, everyone? Welcome back into another edition of the Fan Committee Football Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Tuman, as always, and I'm joined by my co-host, as usual, Michael Herrera. We haven't talked in a bit about the NFL. It's been about a month or so since we did an episode, maybe a little more. But, Mike, we're coming in the stretch run here. December's about to arrive. Both of our teams have been playing very well. So just how are you feeling about the state of the NFL right now?
I think it's been a pretty good NFL season. I've been really enjoying the season, even when, the Dolphins have gone through their highs and lows. I've enjoyed watching just all the teams. I think it's been a good season so far. I hope you would say the same about the Packers because they're playing good recently. So
Yeah, they went from a really solid start to the year, impressive for a good young team. Then they had a lot of bad losses, a lot of injuries. But recently, I would go back to that Steelers game. They did lose that game, but I thought they did a lot of good things. Then they took it to the Chargers, and then a huge win on Thanksgiving last week against the Detroit Lions, a huge upset, drawing the season series even with them. So Packers right back in the playoff race, and we can talk about the playoff races in a sec here. I mean, Seattle, they have a tough schedule coming up. They've been losing some games. So Packers only a game out of the postseason all of a sudden. I don't know if they're actually going to get in. They got the Chiefs this coming week, but I'm very excited regardless because I think I saw what I wanted to see out of Jordan Love this season, as well as some of the young receivers, the rookie receivers, Reed, Wicks. I mean, they've really impressed me. So I don't know. We don't need to talk too much about the Packers because I don't think they're a real contender, but at the same time, they are in that playoff race, like you said. But I think your team is actually much more important. Do you want to start with the AFC playoff race? Because I think that's not only is it jumbled, but it's also very competitive. Like you were saying, I would say a big part of the reason why this NFL season has felt so competitive is that AFC, we kind of thought it would happen before the season, but there's like 10 or 11 teams vying for those playoff spots right now.
yeah, no, it's pretty interesting because if you look at like the NFC playoff picture, the first three teams have, a winning record. And then you get to number 4, it's the Atlanta Falcons at 5-6. And obviously there's other teams outside of that because they're divisional leaders. But it's crazy to think that a team in the thick of the playoff race for the NFC is so low. But then you compare it to the AFC, like you were saying, which has just been off the wall. I mean, every team in playoff contention is above 500. They've been playing extremely well. I think there's a lot of surprises for me personally in the hunt. I think the Ravens being number 1 is insane because I will say personally at the beginning of the season, I didn't think the Ravens had it in them. I thought there were too many unknown guys expected to play big roles, and it's worked out for them incredibly well. Lamar Jackson's been playing incredibly well. I think that he's going to start to get a lot of MVP, vote discussion as the season continues to wind down. And I don't know. I just was not expecting that at all.
So we actually got the chance to preview the Ravens in their entirety before the season, and I was really high on them. I don't remember. No, I didn't have them winning the division because I had the Bengals as my Super Bowl representative in the AFC, but I thought the Ravens were going to make the playoffs. But I thought they were going to do it in a completely different way. I thought bringing Todd Monken in as offensive coordinator, I thought their offense was going to be, maybe like top 3 in the league. I did pick Lamar as my MVP before the season, and the Ravens are playing very well, but it's more because they're winning on defense and their commitment to the run game. I mean, Zay Flowers has been great, don't get me wrong, but Lamar has been great too. But to me, Lamar, he's not putting up giant stats like he did in 2019. The Ravens are winning because Lamar's been just really efficient, really smart, making decisions under center. Obviously, he's still a threat with his legs as well. But I mean, you see Gus Edwards, Keaton Mitchell, just these running backs that aren't premier names, but they're getting the job done. They're committed to getting the job done on the ground. And on the other side of things, their defense, I mean, whether it's the front 7, the secondary, you've had a lot, like you said, a lot of guys break out, like Justin Matabuki, Geno Stone. You mentioned guys before the season that you just wouldn't have circled when you're looking up the roster. But guys like that are making plays for this team. I think they're for real. I don't know if I'd pick them to win the Super Bowl, but I think they're on the short list. Absolutely. Obviously, they're the 1 seed right now. To me, I mean, losing Mark Andrews, honestly, is huge. To me, if they had Mark Andrews the rest of the season, and I know they said there's a slight chance he might come back, but without him, feels like they're lacking a number 1 weapon. And maybe Zay Flowers steps up and fulfills that. But right now, I don't know. I don't know if they could match the Chiefs and Miami's offensive capabilities, but they're playing really well. And I think they're going to hold on to the lead in the North.
Lamar Jackson, although he's not putting up insane numbers, which is why I think a lot of people aren't talking too much about the Ravens and how good they are, is because offensively, the team's just kind of very middle of the pack. And that's fine because that's all they need to be doing because their defense is insane. And it's kind of like they've kind of just perfected what the Dolphins are kind of on their way to doing is that the defense is playing really well and the offense doesn't have to do too much. And although I do have some sentiments about the Dolphins and I'm a little concerned about them, I think the Ravens have just really just they figured it out. Their defense is killing it, and I totally agree with you. I do think it's very like important to know, like as you're saying, Mark Andrews is gone, and Zay Flowers. I think you want to see a little more out of him, a little more consistently, because you want him to prove that he's that number one guy because he got drafted in the first round. And hopefully he's on his way there. I think the Chargers game was really good for him. He scored 2 touchdowns. I think he's got a lot of potential that he's kind of fulfilling right now. But I do agree with you that the offense is probably the biggest thing holding them back from being Super Bowl contenders. Because at the end of the day, you need to be a well-rounded team, and if they can't score points, the defense can only hold out for so long, which is kind of what you see happen with Penn State. Weirdly enough, our defense is good, but our offense doesn't score, so they get tired. And the Ravens hopefully can figure that out, and that doesn't become an issue for them. But it also might. So it depends.
Yeah, I mean, I was just taking a look at Lamar's stats. Only 13 touchdowns, 5 interceptions on the season, but he's got a 98 quarterback rating, 68% completion. And that 98 quarterback rating in previous years, honestly, would have been more middle of the pack. But there's a lot of the premier quarterbacks in the league just haven't been putting up the giant numbers that maybe we're used to. So I don't know. I wouldn't personally have Lamar in my MVP race, but I think across the board, like you're saying, the Ravens have just they're playing team football. And I know that's a cliche, but they just are. Out of every team in the league, it feels like they know what they want to do. The question just becomes, is that going to win for them in the playoffs? Because, I mean, I look at you guys. I'm interested to hear what your reservations are. I know the Dolphins, they lost to Buffalo. They lost to the Chiefs. So everyone's saying they haven't beaten anyone this year. But to me, it doesn't matter because not only has the Dolphins defense gotten better as the years rolled along, you had Ramsey come back, you've had guys like Javon Holland playing great. I know you did lose Jalen Phillips, though. We can talk about that. But on the offensive end, they've perfected the balance where Tua's just airing it out to Waddle and especially Tyreek Hill. And then to me, the running backs don't have to do a lot, but when they're asked to do stuff, they've maximized every touch. I mean, Raheem Mostert's second in the league in rushing, but I'm pretty confident he's not second in the league in attempts, So it feels like Mike McDaniel has just pretty much perfected his offensive vision. It just comes down to, I don't even know, just are they ready to take that next step in the playoffs?
No, I agree. I think one of my biggest reservations, and it's weird because you know me, and I'm sure any of our other friends would attest to it, I'm a huge Tua supporter, and I still am. I still think he's the quarterback of our future, but I'm a little concerned about the fact that he's just for the past, I think 4 or 5 games, he's just consistently thrown at least an interception. And that's really frustrating because the last thing you need is when this offense is so based on the rhythm, getting into rhythm of the motions and making sure everything's correct, which is why penalties were such a big deal for our offense last year because they were taking the rhythm out of the game. The team wasn't getting set properly, and that was a big issue. And I just don't like that he's throwing so many interceptions recently. And he's also kind of cooled down on just how well he's been airing it out. He still is doing a good job overall, but at one point in time, we were saying Tua is the clear MVP, and now that's not really the case anymore. And I just kind of want him to just iron out the mistakes because that's not something we can afford in the playoffs, because I am very confident in this team making the playoffs. I know a lot of people saying, fraud watch, we haven't beat anyone good. And I do agree we need to be, a really good team. I think that's really going to help solidify what kind of team we are and if we can really be true title contenders, because right now we're just playoff contenders. We're in the thick of it, but can we really win a title? We need to be a really good team. But I do think people are trying to discount it too much because we were still close in a lot of those games we lost, except for the Bills. The Bills was a bad game, but the Bills.
That was before the Bills fell off. Yeah.
Yeah, that was before the Bills fell off. The Bills were still a really good team. So I don't think people are trying to say that, the Bills suck now, so that's a bad look for the Dolphins. The Bills were still good at that point. But the Eagles and Chiefs games, we were close. I wouldn't say that penalties or a few miscues were what cost us the game, but we were in there. So I think people are trying to discount it too much, but I'm just a little worried about Tua as a whole. He's been throwing too many interceptions for my liking. I still support him. I still think he's going to get it figured out. I just want him to do it as quickly as possible. And I think Mike McDaniel needs to run a little more. I think teams are very keyed in on Tyreek, and sometimes the offense gets a little stagnant because we're too keyed in on throwing it to Tyreek Hill, which I understand because he's probably the best offensive player in the league right now. But yeah, I want a little more versatility from the rest of the team.
Yeah, I think it's really fair, especially when you see how well really all the backs have played. What's the deal with Devon Chan right now? I know he came back from injury, but I feel like I haven't heard his name much since he did come back.
He got re-injured in that first game, and they've been holding him out as a precaution, which I totally understand because the last thing you want is a guy who's explosive as him to just like completely become a glass cannon like J.K. Dobbins. And you know, it's a shame because J.K. Dobbins is an excellent running back and his career has been mired by injuries. And I don't want that same thing to happen to Devon Achane. And it seems like they're playing it very cautiously because they know how much of a home run hitter he really can be.
Yeah, and I think it's smart, especially for him as a rookie. Maybe just save him for those explosive plays because when you have Mostert running this well, and then we even saw Jeff Wilson finally get healthy. He had a pretty solid game last week against the Jets. So
Mhm.
if they can just strike that balance, I think that'll be really valuable because I mean, outside of Waddle and Hill, you guys don't have a ton of reliable receivers. So if they can just run and run and run and just maximize Tua's throws and let him remain efficient as he's been. You mentioned his interceptions. He's up to 10 on this season. He only had 8 last year in 2 more games. So, it's a little more. He's been turning over a little more than he did last year, but I guess for me, come playoff time, I was taking a look. It had you as the number 23 team in points allowed. So, on the bottom end of the defensive standings, but at the same time, I feel like recently they've been playing a lot better. To be honest, I don't want to make excuses for the Dolphins or I don't want to paint you guys as, not contenders because I really think the Dolphins are contenders. But I do think did catch a lucky break in the sense of I think Buffalo and Cincinnati, on paper should be like the other two really, really, really good offenses.
Mhm.
I feel like Miami's defense might still be trouble, but I think you have a better chance at stopping the Ravens and the Chiefs compared to what we might have thought was going to happen before the year.
No, definitely. I think especially like Jalen Ramsey coming back has been huge. There hasn't been too much talk around about him outside of, like the interceptions, but it's because he's just really locking down that side of the field. And Xavier Howard, his play has also improved, having Jalen Ramsey also playing next to him. And my big concern right now is Jalen Phillips, to be honest. I think this defense has really started to come into its own, but I'm concerned about the whole Jalen Phillips injury because he was definitely our best defensive lineman. And I'm hoping that Bradley Chubb can really just pick it up because although he has played better this year than he did last year, we traded a first round draft pick for him. And I want him to just really just, I want him to bring it. And I'm hoping that Jalen Phillips, although it's unfortunate he's injured, hopefully this will bring it out of Bradley Chubb. And even guys like, Emmanuel Ogba, who he's kind of been replaced by Chubb and Jalen Phillips, who was really good at one point in time. Hopefully he can come back and play better. I just think the defense right now is in a good spot to continue improving and just really solidifying how they play football. I think Vic Fangio, the first half of the season especially, a lot of people were unhappy with the defense because we thought it should be playing better. But I think now that Jalen Ramsey's came back, I think that's really just showcased what we expected them to be. And I think they're going to continue improving. And I kind of hope they do because I think the sky's the limit for this team. I think Vic Fangio has shown that he's one of the best defensive minded coaches in the league. Having a really good defense is what really going to solidify us because we have the explosive offense. I just want the defense to just really bring it home for this team.
I just looked up Jalen Ramsey's stats since he got back. He is allowing a 4.2 quarterback rating in his 4 games since he's returned. So he is still an elite corner, at least so far this season. So he's really been holding it down, like you said. And we saw Javon Holland with that pick six against Tim Boyle on Black
Hail
Friday.
Mary.
Absolute comedy. So I really do think this Dolphins team has the talent to be a better defense. I'm not quite sure why I was a little up and down so far, but I definitely think talent-wise, like you said, they've been playing better lately. I think they have the firepower and the coaching to get there. So, to be honest, I don't want to say, my pick could change depending on what happens, but to be honest, I think the Dolphins, if I had to pick a team to win the AFC right now, it would be Miami because here's the thing about the Chiefs. I know Patrick Mahomes, he's the best quarterback in the league. I know Travis Kelce's the best tight end maybe ever. I know Taylor Swift has powers greater than almost any human being on earth. And I know their defense is playing well. I don't know. I'm just a big believer in you can't win 3 or 4 rounds if you don't have multiple weapons on offense. I just don't think they're trusting. I don't think they have receivers they can trust. And maybe the only one that they can trust, Rashee Rice, I think Rashee Rice needs to get more and more targets because, yes, they've used him. He had a really good game against the Raiders last week. But I don't know. To me, him and Kelsey should just be It should almost be like Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews before Mark Andrews got hurt. Like they should just be this focal pieces. It feels like Andy Reid's like, no, we got to get Kadarius Toney a touch. No, we got to make this Justin Watson thing work out. I don't know. I just think that they have two guys that are clearly better than everyone else in the offense. And maybe Patrick Mahomes would have less interceptions this year if he wasn't forcing it to MBS and Tony and stuff. And Pacheco's played well as well. So I don't know. What do you think about the Chiefs? Because I don't know. I still got them number 3 in my power rankings because I'm going week to week. I go by the results.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had Miami behind the Chiefs, but come playoff time, I'm more confident in Miami.
I see what you're saying, and I'm inclined to agree with you because although the Chiefs are technically the better team, I think the Dolphins are more complete. And I feel like the Ravens are kind of the same thing as the Chiefs. They're just a little better than them right now because the Chiefs and the Ravens both have defenses that are playing really well. But at the end of the day, their offense, outside of their good quarterback and their one or two like solidified good players they know play well, they don't have anyone else. And I totally see what you're saying because at the end of the day, like even sometimes like Isaiah Pacheco doesn't get like, the touch, like the run within the 5 yards of the end zone. Why is it going to Clyde Edwards-Helaire and they're
Yeah.
losing points that way? It kind of feels like, although Andy Reid, I still think is a great coach. And, the 8-3 record proves that he's such a good coach that they're able to work around it. But I think the finally not having good solidified weapons outside of Travis Kelce for Mahomes has finally begun to catch up to them. And I think we really saw that in like the first game of the season, really,
Yeah.
because Travis Kelce wasn't there. Their offense was non-existent that whole game. What happens when a team keys in on Travis Kelce because they know he's their only really good offensive piece outside of Rashee Rice?
Mhm.
Like the Dolphins are capable of doing that. And they did a pretty good job, all things considered, against the Chiefs when we played in Germany. Travis Kelce, he still played well, but they limited him more than other teams have been able to because they had the defensive pieces to do it. And I think now that the Dolphins' defense is continuing improving, if we meet the Chiefs in the playoffs, I think we can beat them this time around. And I do agree with you. The Ravens and Chiefs, I think, are in the same kind of situation. I don't know if they can make it to the Super Bowl or even the conference championship without at least a somewhat decent offense. Although the Ravens, I think, they're at a little different case because, as you said, they're still efficient, even if they're not explosive like the Dolphins might be.
Yeah, I just feel like the Chiefs get sloppy some weeks, and
Mhm.
it's just uncharacteristic. And maybe it's just Andy Reid is just so used to, and Matt Nagy as well. He's the offensive coordinator this year. They're just so used to having just all kinds of weapons. Like remember last year, Jerick McKinnon just was all of a sudden a huge playmaker for them down the stretch. It just felt
Mhm.
like they could scheme anything they wanted around Mahomes. But this year, it's just not the case. Like the guys just aren't good enough to make those plays, or at least not consistent enough. So I don't know. I'm picking against the Chiefs in the AFC, and maybe I'm just being a hater, but I really don't hate the Chiefs. Like I think I've been a pretty supportive of them over the years. So I don't know whether it's the Dolphins or Baltimore. I'm gonna be inclined to pick against KC unless both of those teams just really crater. So outside of those three, I would say, do you agree those are the three biggest contenders in the AFC, or is there any team you think also warrants like being at the top of that list?
I think the other team that I would solidly put as the fourth best would be the Jaguars.
Okay.
Because I like the Jaguars, although I just don't think the Jaguars, although they're really good all around, I think defensively and offensively they're a good team. That's all they are. They're good, and that's not to like disrespect them. I just think that like Trevor Lawrence hasn't like he's been good. He's clearly their future, but he hasn't taken like
Mhm.
as big of a leap as people expected he would. And I think that's going to catch up to them because the other day, Calvin Ridley, like he's great, but he's kind of been up and down a lot of the year, which, is understandable. He took a whole year off. Well, he didn't take a whole year off. He was suspended, but he's out a whole season. And I just think they don't have the home run hitters that, teams like the Dolphins or even the Ravens have. The Jaguars haven't shown that consistently week to week that they have the offensive firepower. And I think we saw that against the Texans was I like the Texans. I think the Texans are good, and they're also in the thick of the playoff race. Like the Jaguars should have beaten them pretty handily, I think, considering how high up in the AFC like playoff rankings they are, and it just didn't work out that way.
Okay, I don't know. I because I like what Houston's doing, but I think it's good that I was actually impressed that the Jags won that game, but because I thought Houston had been playing, they were red hot coming into that game. So I don't know. The Jags are weird for me. I agree with you though. I think they're just good. Like they're the eighth or ninth or 10th best team in the league. They're playing well, but like you said, Trevor Lawrence just hasn't taken that next step yet. Etienne's been really good, but there's certain weeks, case in point against the great Niners defense, where that just doesn't work out and they have to shift the game plan. And yeah, it's just they got good players defensively as well. I mean, outside of Josh Allen, I don't really think they have anyone who's elite at any of their positions. They've got guys playing well. I mean, Darius Williams is leading the league in pass deflections. Tyson Campbell's still a solid corner, but just across the board, I don't think they can stack up to the Chiefs or the Ravens or even the Dolphins because of the talent you guys have, even if the stats aren't there. So to me, unfortunately, I just don't see the Jags as anything more than a second round exit at best. So I wouldn't put them in the. I know you said you wouldn't either, but I just wouldn't put them in the contenders space. I would put them in that second tier for sure.
You want to see more out of them, which is kind of like where my Texans take came from, is that I thought they would do better in that game. They still won, granted, which is, good for them. They were still able to pull it out. Good teams, win games, even if it's ugly. And so that's good for them. But at the end of the day, like you're saying, it's just, there's not a lot of like extreme playmakers that you'd say that's an all pro talent playing on this team outside of me, maybe Josh Allen. So I totally
Yeah.
get what you're kind of saying. I would agree with that.
Yeah, and I think you guys, you're 4 seed right now. I think you'll get the 3 by the end of the year. So just to wrap up on the AFC before we move on. So right now, the wild card teams, to be honest, I think at least 2 of these teams are going to drop out and be replaced. So we have Pittsburgh, number 5. They're coming off a win over the Bengals with Jake Browning. Yeah, Cleveland, who just lost to Denver, who they're red hot, 5 wins in a row, I believe. The Colts, they're 6-5. But unfortunately, we found out today Jonathan Taylor broke his thumb. He might miss a couple games. I also just don't think the Colts, I know they're playing well. They've exceeded expectations. They've impressed me. But I think you'd agree. Like, I don't see them as a playoff team. I think they're probably maybe an 8-win team. Maybe they somehow get the 9, but I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. It's Houston and Denver, and they're currently 8-9. Those are the teams I think can get in. But then you also have Buffalo, who they lose by 3 to the Eagles in one of the best games. It was a goofy game. The Eagles could have lost that game, but at the same time, it was a really good game. Went to overtime. Elliott had the field goal, and then Hurts 5 touchdowns. So the Eagles just pulled ahead. The Bills were up 17-7 in that game. I just think Buffalo, whether it's firing their offensive coordinator mid-season, whether it's all the injuries, especially on defense, and just the fact that they seem to have the turnover bug this year, and that's okay. Like, in the sense of, I don't think Josh Allen, I still think he's an elite quarterback, but he reminds me of, Brett Favre, Tony Romo, just these guys who take risks and they have big arms and they put the ball into play. And some years, those big plays are going to go, the chance of those big plays aren't going to go in your favor. And that's what's going on with the Bills this year. I personally don't see the Bills making the playoffs, but we can talk about that. I personally think the Steelers or Browns will hang on, and then the Texans and Denver will crawl into those last 2 spots. Personally, I'm leaning Pittsburgh over Cleveland because I don't believe in Cleveland's quarterbacks whatsoever. But a lot to unpack there. I'm interested to hear who you think could come out of that AFC wildcard race, because like we talked about at the top, it's really competitive right now.
I agree with you. I think the Colts would be a more interesting topic of discussion if Anthony Richardson was not out for the year.
Yeah,
because
sure.
I think Anthony Richardson showed in the games he played, he was not as raw of a prospect as people wanted to say he was. But unfortunately, he's out the whole year. So I think the Colts, I agree with you, they're going to fall out of the playoff race. If Anthony Richardson was here, I think that'd be a different conversation. But unfortunately, it's not. I agree with you also about the Browns take. I think the Browns, just as fun as DTR is, because he's a young rookie, like late round draft pick, he's not going to get the job done, unfortunately. It's not going to happen. And, that's fine. It's bound to happen that way. I think the Steelers, though, I think that the Steelers, they're not contenders. They're not contenders, but I do think that firing Matt Canada is huge for them. They finally went over 400 yards offensively, and that could be a big turning point for this team. I think the Texans are going to sneak their ways into the playoff. I think CJ Stroud, I think he's been playing MVP level. I think he's the most important player on this team. I don't think if you have any other quarterback in that situation, the Texans are not where they are today. Even though they lost to the Jaguars, I still think they're riding a good wave of just really well-played games.
Yeah, to me, Houston, like you said, I think CJ Stroud, I wouldn't pick him to be MVP, but he should be in that race because he's elevating everyone on that offense. Just look at their talent. I'm sorry, and Tank Dell's been really good as a rookie. I think he's maybe their biggest prospect on the offense going forward in terms of skill position players. But Devin Singletary, Dalton Schultz, Noah Brown, like come on, and then Nico Collins, who I like, but I didn't think he had this in him. I think CJ Stroud is the guy who's elevating this offense. I don't want to take anything away from those receivers, but that's the way I see it. I agree. I think CJ Stroud has completely elevated that team. He's going to be the runaway rookie of the year. And then defensively, they've been in a lot of shootouts, but it's a younger team across the board. I think it's okay that the Texans probably get into the playoffs as this 9-win team who, maybe they can't really hang with these contenders points wise, or maybe they can't stop these other contenders points wise. They're in shootouts, but they're a fun team. They just got to add some more guys in the coming years, but I definitely think they're the playoff team. And I also think Denver, I mean, they're winning games right now, and they're doing it because they're playing. We kind of talked about the Ravens, a similar style, but even more so, just running the ball and making things really simple for Russell Wilson. They're coming off some big wins over Minnesota and Cleveland last week. They've knocked off just about every team they needed to in these wildcard races. They beat Buffalo, they beat Cleveland, and now Houston and Denver are playing this coming week. And listen, I think Denver, no matter who loses that game, I'm still confident in both teams. But to me, if Denver wins that game, they might be like a surefire lock for me to make the playoffs. Because if you look at their schedule, down the stretch, they got the Chargers twice, they got the Raiders, they got the Patriots, they do have Detroit. So overall, I think if they can go 4-2 down the stretch, get to 10 wins, I think they're a shoo-in for the playoffs.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I know sometimes I can be bullish about my opinions on certain things, but the Broncos, I have to hand them their flowers. I think they've really come around after getting 70 hung on them by the Dolphins. I think that maybe just made them reevaluate as a team. And, I was very critical of like the Sean Payton hiring, or the trade. I guess it's not hiring, the trade, I suppose.
Yeah.
Not because he has a Super Bowl pedigree. I just thought the way he was acting about the team before the season, it was not a good look, and it did not inspire confidence that this was a team who had the maturity to go places. But it seems after they got 70 dropped on them, they've really changed their tune. Whatever they changed or whatever they reevaluated has been working for them. I think Russ, people aren't really talking about it too much, but Russ has been pretty good this year, all things considered. He's really improved from where he was last season. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that vintage like Danger Russ come back. They've been good. Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, they're not amazing, crazy home run hitter like running backs, but they're getting the job done. It's like you said, their defense has been pretty solid as well. I mean, but that's pretty easy when you have Patrick Surtain, who's one of the top corners in the league right now. I would definitely change my tune on how I felt before the season. I think the Broncos have really come around, and they could also sneak into the playoffs. Although the Steelers, I think, have the best chance of the bottom three teams of staying in the playoff race, I could easily see the Broncos replacing the Steelers because Kenny Pickett does not inspire me in any which way.
That's the thing about the Steelers is as good as their defense can play at times, they have the all-stars, the heavy hitters, and the run game has looked better too. I mean, Jaylen Warren and Najee have been playing better. The Kenny Pickett thing, I just can't. I just don't believe in it. I know he has some good games, these miracle drives from time to time. I also don't believe in their receivers. I mean, Pickens, I know he makes some big plays and he has some really good games. I've been following his season all year because I've got him in fantasy. There's just weeks where he either there's the 1 week where he had -1 yards and he got really mad and people thought he was going to request a trade. But even outside of that, there's just weeks where he looks disinterested. Not to mention Deontay Johnson as well. We saw this week there's a couple plays where he just was lacking effort. Mm-hmm. So just quarterback and receivers combined, I just don't believe in that Steelers offense, but it might not matter because they just find ways to win games. That's just what they do. I would right now I'll go Steelers, I go Texans, I go Denver. But if Buffalo shows me something, I mean, they put up 34 this week, but listen, putting up 34 on the Eagles this year is not as impressive as it would have been last year. The Eagles defense, we can shift gears to the NFC in a moment here. The Eagles are a really good team, but it's in spite of a lot of holes on their team. Mm-hmm. I don't know. To me, it's just, I think Denver, especially because Denver beat Buffalo earlier in the year, I think they're going to get that last spot over there. And Mike, one thing I wanted to point out to you is if Denver makes the playoffs, we could be looking at Miami versus Denver again. So are you going to put up 70 points? Are you going to put up 70 points in the playoffs?
I don't think so, but I think if we do play Denver again, we could definitely beat Denver.
I would hope so.
Yeah, because if we hang 70 on them in the regular season, then lose in the playoffs to the Broncos, I mean, I'm packing it up. I might just have to be a Broncos fan after that point. That'd be crazy. I'd be in shambles, quite frankly. But no, I do agree with you. The Eagles, it's I know people would say that like it's like hater behavior, fly Eagles fly, whatever. I know they're 10-1, but they have some holes. They really do. Jalen Hurts, as much as I like Jalen Hurts, he's having a down year. Every quarterback has a down year. I think, a lot of people, Dak had a really bad year last season. Let's be
Yep.
honest. He had a
Yep.
really bad year last season, and we're seeing that kind of season from Josh Allen now. And Jalen Hurts is also kind of going through that. Just you have a bad year. Sometimes you're a good quarterback. It's going to happen. Teams might kind of figure out more of what you're doing, and you have to adjust. But good quarterbacks adjust, and I'm sure Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen as well will both improve next year again. But Hurts has been kind of very up and down. The tush push, and I'm not a hater of the tush push either, but that's been a huge help, a huge crutch for this offense. There's a lot of teams who can't rely on stuff like that, and I think the Eagles, they're relying on what they know works for them, but I'm worried that that's eventually not going to work because good teams are going to figure out eventually how to get around
Yep.
just the crutches the Eagles team is founded on. And I think the Eagles are a great team, but I agree with you. There's a lot of holes. And I think the 49ers game that's coming up is huge for like their whole
Yes.
season trajectory. I really do think so.
If the Eagles win the Niners game, they're going to be guaranteed the 1 seed. They're going to be pretty much guaranteed home field advantage in the playoffs, just
Mhm.
like last year. And it's crazy. They're 10-1. They make their fans sweat these games out every week. This is like if you're just scrolling Wikipedia and you look at the 22 Eagles and the 23 Eagles, like, oh yeah, the Eagles are on a great run here. They had 2 great years. It's like the same team. But we're in the moment. We're watching these games. It is a totally different team. The secondary is so much worse this year. Even the offensive line, I've been looking at some stats each week. Like they're allowing a lot more sacks than you'd think for the supposed, best offensive line in football. And I still respect the hell out of that offensive line, but it's just the truth. And like you said about Hurts, he has a lot more interceptions this year compared to last year. Now he's coming off an amazing game against Buffalo, got him on the culture rankings, all that. But on the year across the board, you're correct. So to me, if they beat the Niners, I mean, I just have to shut up and be like, okay, they win all these close games, but they beat the Chiefs, they beat the Niners, they beat in Dallas, like whatever. But I don't think they're going to beat the Niners because I think they're due, like you said, you can't win by 3 every week. You can't cover up your mistakes over and over and over and over again. I understand, Philly, that grit. Like, trust me, like I love the Sixers. I love the Phillies. I'm spitting the same propaganda for those teams, but it doesn't mean I don't think the Eagles can win the Super Bowl. But they got Dallas and the Niners the next 2 weeks. They're dropping at least one of those games. I'm sorry, like the magic has to run out at some point, and I just think if you take away the games where Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel were inactive, the Niners have been a better and more complete team than Eagles all season long. They're just playing better football, in my opinion. I don't know if that will happen in January, but what do you think about that? Because I think the Niners, pound for pound, it's weird because I do my power rankings every week, so I sound like contradicting myself because I put the Eagles number one, but it's because like I can't dispute the fact that they have the best record in the league and
Yeah.
continue to beat these good teams by 3 points. But to me, the Niners would be my Super Bowl winning pick right now.
I think I agree with you. The 49ers defense is insane. Their defensive line, they brought in Chase Young. They're incredible. Nick Bosa, I know he's having a down year. He's still good, though. That D line is still really good. And I agree with you also that the Eagles O line has not been as good as they typically are. I think the problem with the Eagles is that they just it's like you're saying, the grit is great, but the grit's not going to get you anywhere. I know that very much as like a Miami Heat fan. It doesn't matter how far Heat culture takes us, it's not going to win us the finals. We saw that against the Nuggets. When you play a complete team who's really good, you're going to suffer because they're going to expose the things you can't do well. And the Niners, as much flack as Kyle Shanahan gets for being a choker, he's an incredibly intelligent coach. He knows how to game plan. He knows how to scheme his players the right way. I think the Eagles defense has been really suspect compared to last year's, and I think they're in for a rude awakening against the Niners. I know that they're 2 wins above them. I get it, but it's the Eagles are shaky this year. I think that's just the best way to say it. They're just not as good as they were last year.
I completely agree. And man, when you're talking about the Niners, we can do a little brief MVP discussion right now. To me, we're talking about all these quarterbacks having a down year, and that doesn't mean Pat Mahomes and Jalen Hurts and whoever else aren't great. But to me, the MVP guys who should be at the top of the list are McCaffrey, and we already talked about him, Tyreek Hill. Those are the best two players on offense in the NFL this season. I've been advocating. We've talked about this before. I think there should be offensive MVP and defensive MVP, not MVP and these offensive whatever. Like I
Mhm,
think the MVP award as a whole is just stupid. They need to
mhm,
reconfigure it. That
mhm.
aside, if we're just looking at what the NFL has given us, I think this is the year. We haven't had a non-quarterback since Adrian Peterson. It's time to break that mold. I think McCaffrey. I'd lean him, but honestly, you can go either way. I think Tyreek's also been incredible. I mean, he's leading the league in receiving yards, already 1,300 through what is it, 11 games. And then McCaffrey got the most touchdowns. He's got the most rushing yards. The Niners are the better team, so maybe you could argue Tyreek Hill is like elevating the Dolphins compared to McCaffrey has all this talent around him. But those to me are the two guys individually we should be looking at.
I think Tyreek Hill probably should be the MVP favorite if he can break Calvin Johnson's receiving yard record. He's pretty close to it. He's projected to get over 2,000. So if a non-quarterback's going to win it, it's going to be Tyreek. I just think that a 2,000-yard wide receiver, it's like if he's able to do that, you kind of have to put him over Christian McCaffrey, as great as McCaffrey has been. If he can break that record, he will undoubtedly prove that he is the most important player to our offense. He's really been the engine of this, like the car that is the Dolphins offense. Considering the way the league handles the MVP award, which I do agree with you, we've had this discussion about just getting rid of it and making offensive and defensive MVPs. It's not likely that a non-quarterback's going to win it, even though a non-quarterback should absolutely win it. And if McCaffrey were to win it over Tyreek, I'd be totally happy with that as well. But I just don't think it's really going to happen because I believe people were saying that like even though Jalen Hurts played really badly in the Chiefs game, it still made his MVP odds go up, which is very telling of just how the NFL treats this award. But I think Christian McCaffrey, I don't think enough people are talking about how good of a season he's having. I think he's definitely runaway for offensive player of the year. If he's not going to be MVP, he's definitely offensive player of the year.
But
So
why not Tyreek Hill? This is what I mean. The MVP is so weird. Like I don't
that's
get
the
it.
thing. I think Tyreek Hill should be MVP, and then I think Christian McCaffrey should be offensive player of the year. I think that's how it should go.
But I disagree. Like that doesn't make sense. They should. It's the same award.
That's true. It is the same award. I agree with you because when was the last time a defensive player won MVP?
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
like TJ Watt, you could argue he should be a defense like
Yeah.
MVP
Or
because
Miles
he's
Garrett. Yeah.
or Miles Garrett too. But considering the way the awards handled, it's odd. It's odd, but I
It's
think
bizarre.
Christian McCaffrey or Tyreek Hill, one of them has to win an award this year.
Mhm. I'm standing my
Hopefully,
ground on this. I will be picking one of those two skill position players on my unofficial Joe Tuman ballot. Christian McCaffrey, like you said, people don't realize how good he's playing. He is leading the league in rushing yards. He has never led the league just as a runner in rushing yards. Usually he gets his yardage from his all-purpose stuff with his receptions and his rushing yards coming together. He's leading the league in scrimmage touchdowns with 16, and then he's got 939 rushing yards. Now, Tyreek Hill, though, he's already at 1,300 plus receiving yards, 88 receptions. So like you're saying, like he's doing things even crazier, but both of them together, maybe you're swaying me on Tyreek Hill because I feel like Tyreek Hill is the Dolphins offense where the Niners, they got Kittle, they got Debo, we know how it is. So, but they're both very much, to me, those are the top two guys. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe Tyreek Hill, if he breaks Calvin Johnson's record, I mean, like you said, that's a pretty crazy achievement. So that's something to watch for down the stretch. I definitely agree. But getting back to just the playoff standings, so outside the Niners and the Eagles, do you think there's any NFC? Like, do you think there's an NFC team that can crash that party? If we're talking about fraud watch, a lot of people are saying Dallas hasn't beaten anyone, but I don't know. I think Dallas is playing as good as they ever have. Do I think they're as good as the Niners and the Eagles? No. But man, they've been playing some exciting football lately.
I think the Cowboys. The thing with me and the Cowboys is that I'm a pretty avid Cowboys hater. I hate that they're America's team. I understand why they technically are. I hate that because everyone outside of Cowboys fans hates the Cowboys. So why are they America's team? I'll never know. I just don't think the Cowboys are ever going to get anywhere substantial with the way they are now because this has happened for so many years in a row. The Cowboys have been really good for a long time, but have they ever done anything with it? No, they haven't. And a lot of people would point to, the Des Bryant catch as like, oh, they were robbed of,
No,
these great successes, but
it was
who
not a catch.
cares? It wasn't a catch. I agree. I don't think it was a catch because the ball comes out, but whatever, who cares? I just don't think until the Cowboys get to even the conference championship again, I don't I don't believe in them. And I know that's kind of unfair because that's kind of like it doesn't really make sense because it's not based on a year to year thing, but it's just that like they just don't have it in them. And I think that like the Lions are better off as like being a better team. I know the Lions lost to the Packers, but I think that's more just like the Lions were due for like a really bad game, and I think that was their bad game. I think that in like a few weeks I could change my tune and say the Lions suck. The Cowboys have proven they're better. But until I see the Cowboys really beat someone really good, I don't think you can put them in that like upper echelon of the NFC teams, which is kind of how I feel about the Dolphins. I know that the Dolphins are also in a similar position where we haven't beaten anyone good, but I think they've just shown they're more complete as a team, I think, for the most part, compared to the Cowboys, who are they're very up and down on like which side of the team is playing the best. But I think their defense has been really good, especially Deron Bland. I think Deron Bland's on pace for at this point an all pro season. Let's be honest with ourselves. I mean, what he's been able to do is insane. But I think until the Cowboys can prove that they really do have what it takes to win, it doesn't really matter how good they are to me because they just haven't shown that in just who knows how many countless seasons where we've said the same thing about them.
Yeah, I think the one thing they do have going for them is that defense. You mentioned Deron Bland, but really just across the board, the Bland thing is crazy. He basically filled the role that Diggs left behind with his injury, and almost is, at least from a interception standpoint, is almost doing it better than him. Just the way he's able to create offense on defense. I mean, that's what you want from your defense. That's the most you can ask from a secondary player, and he's doing it like literally no one ever has. He set the single season pick six record. So yeah, I think he's in the defensive player of the year running as well. But with that aside, like you said, Dak is kind of having a bounce back year where this year it's Hurts and, maybe Josh Allen having, some bad luck with the interceptions. Dak has been on fire, and so does CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb has elevated himself into that, top, I was even higher than top 10, like top 7, top 8, something like that. But he's been amazing. My dad's a Dallas fan. I think the big concern he has, well, one, I don't think he's ever going to be super confident in Dak and McCarthy as playoff guys, but also like Pollard has been good, but they haven't really established him. Maybe it's because he's coming off the injury, but they haven't really established him in that offensive line the way they have in years past, and the defense has kind of helped make up for that. But to your point, it just is hard for me to believe in them come playoff time when they just can't beat the Eagles and they can't beat the Niners. The Niners killed them again in this regular season after they beat them in the playoffs 2 years prior to that. So Dallas better beat the Eagles in 2 weeks because we were talking about the Eagles are due for a loss. And if the Eagles beat San Fran this week, Dallas better beat them the week after. I mean, I don't know. It's just you can't have the Eagles sweep you if you want to be considered in that contention sphere. And you mentioned Detroit. I don't have much to say about them. They're kind of like the Jags to me. I think they're good. I think Amon-Ra and Jahmyr Gibbs have been great. I'm glad that Dan Campbell, after a few, weird games with Gibbs early in his season, he's kind of found that blend of Montgomery and Gibbs that he never really found with Swift before. He's been using Gibbs a lot better. To me, their defense hasn't. It started out the season pretty good, but they allowed the Chargers to put 38 on them. And the Packers beat them, looked really strong as well. And that Packers offense, as we know, has not been very consistent in terms of its, just play calling, stuff like that, performance across the season. So I think Detroit's good. They're probably a first-round exit for me at the hands of probably Dallas. So I don't know. I think Dallas is definitely third in the NFC, but yeah, it's just hard to buy into anyone outside of San Fran and the Eagles right now.
No, I mean, I definitely understand that. I just think they're the two teams that have shown consistently that they're good on all fronts. Although we did say the Eagles are shaky, they still are a good team. I don't know about you. I just don't think they have what it takes to win the Super Bowl this year, even if they are a really good team. And I just think as you go down the list of NFC teams, there's more teams you'd say that about than you would about, like the AFC. The AFC, there's three, I think, solidified contenders is the Ravens, Chiefs, and Dolphins. But then you've got teams like the Jaguars knocking on the door. But with the NFC, it's just the Eagles and Niners, like you were saying. There's just not a lot of solidified, top dogs in that division or conference, I should say. And I think we just need to see more out of these teams. Like the Falcons at 5-6 are playoff bound at this rate. And as much as I like the Falcons, they're like, like it's not inspiring to see this from the NFC.
The Falcons. I had them like 24th on my power rank because they win one game and now they're in the playoffs. It's that division is horrible. To me, I don't want to talk too much about the South because honestly, I remember before the year we're like, oh, the South might be better than people think. Actually, Atlanta and New Orleans could both be 10-win teams. Come on, man. I can't. I'm upset about Derek Carr. I really thought he's gonna have a bounce back year. That Saints team is just. I talk to Chris about it all the time. Is they change. They change every week. You can't even figure out what they're gonna do. And they just can't score points. Like they'll move the ball down the field and they can't capitalize. Kamara is just a points per reception farmer in fantasy football, but that doesn't lead to actual productive offense in real life. So I don't know. That whole division's a mess. But I still think the Saints might win it, but like whatever. I'm more interested in the wild card, mainly because my Packers suddenly have a shot. Aaron Jones has been in and out of the lineup all year. Christian Watson, until last week against the Lions, was just having a really bad year. There's weeks where he just didn't even really feel like he was trying to make the big plays. But all of a sudden, huge game against Detroit. Jaden Reed, I think, is a shoe-in for one of the all-rookie teams. I think he's been great. Really, the thing about this Packers team, it just comes down to the fact that Jordan Love is he's playing with a lot more poise. And it feels like I don't even feel like the problems have been solved. This team still has no left tackle. They still don't have a run game. And they still got a lot of young receivers who could make a mistake at any moment. I just think Jordan Love, I genuinely believe in him. He has convinced me completely that he's the right guy to be this team's quarterback for the next few seasons because he has kept a straight face the whole year through all the ups and downs. I mean, he's had some bad games, don't get me wrong, but I don't know. He stayed composed. The defense has a new injury every week, and yet this team is a game outside the playoffs. And as I mentioned earlier, Seattle's got a really tough schedule. I think the Packers, they have a shot. They beat the Rams. They beat the Rams because, I mean, they got lucky. Matt Stafford wasn't playing. They played Brett Rippon. But still, they have the win over the Rams. They would have a tiebreaker. I can't believe the Packers. And Minnesota just lost somehow in that stupid 12-10 game last night to Chicago. I just cannot believe this Packers team wrote me in. I was like accepting, like, okay, this is a rebuilding year. They're going to go 6-11. And now, like, they're on the precipice. It's just like last season where I thought they rallied late in the season. So I'm hoping this time they actually finish the job and can get into the playoffs. But there's still, a month left of the season to be played out. But what do you think about the NFC wild card race? It's kind of a mess outside of the Cowboys. They kind of all suck to a degree, but it's, teams got to make the playoffs.
I think right now the Cowboys are going to pretty solidly be like the number one wild card team we see. Like they're not going to be better than the Eagles at the end of the season, but they're going to solidify like a playoff spot in one way or another. I think the two teams to watch out for really are the Packers and the Rams, because I don't think the Vikings are ultimately going to make the playoffs. I think the Packers and the Rams have the best shot. You guys beat the Rams, so I think you guys are a little better than the Rams right now. But I think just the Packers, Jordan Love has been really good, like you were saying, even though he had kind of a weird start to the season. He had a few down weeks, but I just don't think the Vikings have what it takes. Even if Josh Dobbs, this like game against the Bears is an anomaly, he can't do it all for this team. And like neither Justin Jefferson is not going to be able to do that either. We've seen that in the past with the Vikings. Like it's just not on the cards for them. I don't think this team is complete enough to win. I think the Seahawks are also not doing great. They're 6-5. They're also like other teams are knocking on the door. If they lose the next game and the Packers win the next, the Packers and the Seahawks have the same record. And suddenly, the wild card race is flipped. But I think the Packers have the best shot of making the wild card out of these teams.
I can't believe it. It's true, though. I can't believe it, but it's true.
I just think that even with all the the issues you guys teams have, your team has, I think I just think offensively you guys are really good, and defensively you've been in it for the most part as well. And I think you're better than the record suggests because you guys are a really young team. You have the talent, but at the same time you're young. So of course the record doesn't reflect the talent necessarily because there's a maturity and experience that comes with being in the league to help you solidify as being really good.
Yep. I've been saying it all year. Like I'll never understand how they didn't get a veteran like receiver or run it or like tight end or something. But at the same time, like it's hard because Jaden Reed's playing really well.
Mm-hmm.
But he's the one guy I think has proven to be consistent every week, at least over the past couple, like 2 months. Mm-hmm. But to me, like Dontavian Wicks has been a revelation in terms of being a 5th-round pick. Romeo Doubs having 7 touchdowns. I mean, it's almost a fluke to me, but at the same time, he's played well. And Watson's just been a disappointment. But just to me, if you put like, I don't know, just, Dallas might have got Brandon Cooks. If Green Bay got Brandon Cooks, if he's our number 2 or even number 1 receiver, I just think that's gives Jordan Love a little something extra to rely on. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, especially it's weird. It's weird to complain when all these young guys have stepped up, especially recently. But I do think in terms of finishing the job down the stretch, like that would have been important. But it's neither here nor there. They've exceeded my expectations. You mentioned Seattle. The reason I think we're both in agreement that they're kind of the race is that the Rams swept them. Like they went 2-0, and they're without Kenny Walker right now. And it just feels like watching Red Zone every week, they seem soft. And I really thought this team, I believed in the Seahawks. I picked them to win the division. Which is kind of crazy looking back that I picked them over San Fran, but I did. I really liked their offseason. They made a nice trade deadline move for Leonard Williams. I don't know. It just feels like they roll over. That's the biggest thing. They get in a hole and it doesn't feel like they come back this year. But that's why I think they're going to miss out. I can't believe I'm going to defend the Vikings, though. I do think I would pick Packers and Rams because I trust McVay. I think they're doing good stuff. The one thing I'll say about Minnesota is that their defense is playing a lot better than I expected it to, and it's kind of kept them in games. And with Jefferson coming back, I know Dobbs is not Cousins. He's not going to be able to air it out. But, man, when you got Jefferson, Addison, and Hawkinson, all the sins out there, I don't know. That's just a lot of weapons, and Josh Dobbs has had some good games. So I don't want to rule out the Vikings yet. The Packers got to beat them down the stretch here. I don't know. There's like a slight possibility that we have 3 NFC North teams in the playoffs. I would pick the Rams or the Vikings right now, but man, could you imagine thinking that before the season?
You know what? It wouldn't have been on my bingo card for how the season was going to go, but it would be a hell of a way to end, just I love an unpredictable NFL season. If there's anything more interesting than things going exactly the way you wanted them to, it's unpredictability and just wild stuff happening. And it would be really funny if it did.
Yes, it definitely would be funny. I agree. So, yeah, that's going to do it for this edition of the Fan Committee. Next time we do this, I don't know. It might just be a playoff breakdown preview thing, but we also, Mike, we're going to be talking about the all-pro teams. We're going to be giving our picks for the best players in the NFL this season. That's coming down the pipeline. So we're excited to do that. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Fan Committee. Make sure to follow on Spotify or subscribe on YouTube if you aren't already. And other than that, next time we talk to you, the Packers will be clinching the playoffs. So thank you for listening. Have a great rest of your day.